Welcome back, viewers. Welcome back. Thank you so much for tuning in. Really want to appreciate you, the fact that you've just tuned in to this channel. For those who are, coming for the first time, please do subscribe, hit that notification bell. On this channel, I post content to do with social work, especially practicing with children, because that's my bread and butter. First and foremost, I'm just gonna put a disclaimer to say the content I deliver on this channel doesn't represent any of my employers at any given point, but it's few nuggets from my own experiences and the way I've been seeing things over the years that I've been practicing as a social worker. The purpose is meant to educate some fellow colleagues and other families out there in terms of things that are going on in our profession and all that, and just to sort of like start up a conversation to also unpack a few things which are also going on as I'm obviously delivering topic by topic on this channel. I just want to appreciate you tuning in, and if you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe, hit the notification bell so that when I post, you'll be the first person to know. And today's video, I'm just going to be talking to you a little bit about the growing problem of homelessness in England, and its impact on children's services. Right. So, in terms of when I talk about the issue of homelessness in England, I'm talking more specifically to those families who find themselves homeless. Mainly, they're also having children in their care, and I'm just going to unpack a little bit in terms of how some of these families end up being referred to children's services, because at times, housing departments do view it as a children's issue if parents are not able to keep up with payments for their mortgage or for their rentals and stuff like that. They usually end up viewing it as a matter for children's services to investigate whether there is neglectful parenting, or whether there are any other challenges which is impacting that family. But more especially these days, we are seeing more and more families presenting as homeless, and we know this has been the trend. We've got many agencies which are dealing with issues around homelessness. For example, we've got Shelter UK, which has been advocating for policy changes and stuff like that within this sector. This video is not going to unpack all the work that they are doing, because I know they are doing quite marvelous work out there, but it's just going to unpack the problem of homelessness and its impact on children's services, how it impacts the budget of children's services and stuff like that. First and foremost, the most important thing to point out is that it's a growing crisis in England, and thousands of families obviously are facing housing, as housing insecurity, and it's really an issue out there. And each time, for example, each time I'm gonna be back on duty, there's always a family that presents, as homeless, for example. And this is a growing trend, really. And some reasons, vary, as to the reasons why families do find themselves homeless. Sometimes, it could be an impact around death in the family, or sometimes it could be a situation where they've been evicted under Section 21. There are many legal loopholes that landlords are actually finding out there to actually render some families homeless. And there are also instances where sometimes families are actually deemed to have made themselves intentionally homeless, and at the end of the day, they find themselves being referred to children's services. So local authorities are mostly struggling to support such families, and it's not only a few local authorities, but I think this is a crisis, or this is an issue with most local authorities, up and down the length of England, really. And usually, what they usually do would be to refer to children's services as a last resort, especially if they've deemed them to have made themselves intentionally homeless, and they send them to children's services. So I'm just going to unpack a little bit in terms of why that is happening, and the impact it has on children's services. First and foremost, I would say there is a lack of suitable housing options. We all know that has been the thing for close to 2 decades now in England. And due to this shortage of social housing, there is also rising private rental costs which are associated with this, because obviously if there's little shortage on social housing from housing association and local authorities, people then resort to privately rented accommodation, and then when there is demand, the price goes high in terms of the housing market and stuff like that. So most housing departments sometimes do refer families to children's services when they cannot provide immediate accommodation for those for that family, especially in instances where they've sometimes family turns down upon an allocation for housing for one reason or another. Sometimes there's so much mold in it, or sometimes it's in a state of disrepair, and once the family says no, we can't take this property, then they would deem them to have made themselves intentionally homeless, and the next thing is they'll just refer them to children's services. So that's one thing that we are seeing. All that is because of lack of suitable housing options. So because the house is suitable, the family says no, we can't take this property, then the housing department will be saying you've made yourself intentionally homeless. Then they refer them to children's services. So that's number one. Number two, there are cases where they, like I said earlier on, the housing department deems them to have made themselves intentionally homeless. What happens with regards to this is, if a family is deemed to have made themselves intentionally homeless, e.g. by rent arrears or by eviction, it could be Section 21 eviction, or it could be any other reasons that could have happened for that particular family, they may be denied housing support and then they are referred to children's services. This is what happens on a daily basis, really. And then number three, there are also legal, statutory loopholes which are there, where what I'm going to say about this could be controversial, but that's the reality. Housing laws and social care laws, they do operate separately, and because they do operate separately, it leads to cases where families sometimes fail or fall between the cracks, because housing departments will be, pushing away responsibility to children's services. But then if you look at it, we have done an assessment, the only need for this family is housing, but children's services is not a housing department. So what do you do with it? You can't leave, families out there unaccommodated or on the streets. That's not going to happen. Children's services will be step in and provide accommodation, but that's not the primary responsibility for children's services. We are there to be safeguarding children, to be looking after, issues around neglect and stuff like that. But if you look at it really, if an assessment has been done, there is no issues around parenting. There is no issues around the way this mother is managing her money. For example, she's been evicted through a fault which is not a fault. She finds herself homeless, and after an assessment has been done by a social worker, it's deemed that the only need is housing. These are some of the legal loopholes which are there, and what then happens is, if the housing department can't assist, they do refer these families to children's services, and the expectation is that children's services will need to intervene and support going forward. And then there is also an issue which I would obviously say crisis response rather than prevention. So there's no that linkage between the housing department and children's services, to an extent that the housing department doesn't refer families who are failing to pay their rent on time to children's services to get in the support, to do some income and expenditure work to be done with them, or for some early help support to be put in place. They only do refer when things really get out of hand. And in my view, I think that's not how it's supposed to be working. You need to be referring these families earlier on, so that support can be put in place to avoid a situation where they might actually be deemed to be homeless at the end of the day, rather than refer them to children's services only when they are homeless. So by saying this, what then happens is, some housing departments usually view children's services as a last resort when they cannot meet the demand of these families. And despite homelessness being the primary housing issue, or being the primary issue of concern, it's not a safeguarding one, they still refer to children's services. So what are the challenges which children's family or children's services do face when it comes to issues around homelessness? One, there is increased caseloads. What does somebody might wonder, okay, what's the impact of that? The impact is, a social worker was supposed to be responding to case or to instances where there is real need, where children need to be safeguarded, where there are real concerns around the welfare of children, ends up dealing with issues around homelessness, which is not really an urgent issue if you look at it, if it is not really the primary reason why children's services is actually there. So the other thing I'm going to mention also is, social workers end up handling more housing related cases, diverting resources from child protection or family support, which is actually the primary goal of children's services at the end of the day. And then there is also the emotional and developmental impact it has on children. Children move schools quite a lot because families have been rendered homeless, and sometimes it leads to instability. Sometimes it leads them to live in an environment which they are not even accustomed to. There's issues around also peer pressure that could happen, in that new environment. There's also disruption in terms of their schooling calendar, schooling activities, which all leads to poor mental health with regards to children who are actually homeless. The statistics on children or families who are homeless, it's quite shocking because I'm talking of thousands in the whole of England. So that's something to just think about. Obviously, I'm not going to be dwelling much on the statistics in this video because I can do another video, separate video, to talk about the statistics, just to put everything into context really. The other impact this has also is that when those families are referred to children's services is then expected to be offering accommodation to these families, which runs into hundreds, sometimes into thousands of pounds per week, which is unsustainable in the long run. What do children's services do? We make use of Section 17 support, but this money is not meant for that. And sometimes we overrun the budgets because we end up paying for accommodation, which is not supposed to be the primary, the primary, thing that we do as children's services. So some families are provided with temporary accommodation or temporary financial assistance to make sure that they meet their housing needs under Section 17. But this is not sustainable in the long run. And what happens is most local authorities actually do overrun their budgets. And when they do overrun their budgets, it's actually taking away budget which is supposed to be devoted to something else, to actually be looking at providing support and accommodation to these families, whereas it's not supposed to be like that. That's what I was supposed to be. It's actually supposed to be like. And there is also obviously the last thing which it causes, in my view, would be there's an issue around conflicting responsibilities where, for example, children's services are actually offering housing need to this family, whereas that's not the primary objective or the primary role that children's services actually established to be doing at the end of the day, which causes lots of delays for this family to be getting the support that they need from the housing department, because this back and forth which is there between children's services and the housing department is actually not healthy to anyone. It's not healthy to the families, is the primary thing that I need to be talking about here. But it's also not healthy to the social workers because they end up dealing with issues which is beyond their scope, so to speak, at the end of the day. And looking at how can this situation be strengthened, or how can this situation be remedied, there's need for a strengthened joint working between housing and children's services, where we need to be making sure that we've got established clear protocols on what needs to be happening, so that we don't have a situation where we end up having housing departments offloading their responsibilities onto children's services. We need to strengthen the multi-agency collaboration between housing and children's services, including joint training and including joint case reviews on those families where we think that there has been a lack or there has been a lax in things that needed to be done with each of the agencies. There's need for a serious case review to have been done and to make sure that those things don't happen again, because at the moment it's like this back and forth, and then when it continues, it's actually the families who are actually suffering more or who are being impacted more by that. And then there's also need to an extent possibly look at reforming the housing laws and to prioritize children's welfare, to amend legislation so that families with children are automatically classified as in need as a priority for housing, reduces the inappropriate need to be referring to children's services. Because if their laws in housing department doesn't classify children or doesn't classify families with children as high priority, then there is a problem. Well, no matter whatever happens, you can't tell a family where there are children to say you've deemed yourself homeless, so we can offer you accommodation. It shouldn't be working like that. You should actually be putting in support to make sure that if it is to do with arrears, if it is to do with noise, whatever it is, support is put in place so that those things can actually be worked through or can be reduced going forward really. And I think by so doing, we will prevent this title, which is coming up, where housing departments call families they've made themselves intentionally homeless. It's something with something which is just coming up, not so long ago, maybe 5, 6, 10 years ago. It wasn't there all along. And as a result, it's actually penalizing vulnerable families. And when you penalize vulnerable families, you're actually penalizing the children for the deeds of their parents. Whereas it's not supposed to be like that. As an advocate for children, I don't think it's supposed to be like that. It doesn't need to be like that at all. Because what you are basically doing there, you are saying, oh, these children can actually be on the street because your mom didn't do this or your mom didn't do that. That's not how it's supposed to be working, really. And I think we also need to make sure that government increases, investment in social housing, and temporary accommodation needs to be purpose built, not necessarily purpose built, but whichever families you put in temporary accommodation, they need to be in a functional temporary accommodation where they can actually have cooking facilities and stuff like that. Whereas at the moment, most families are actually just placed in a hotel where there is not even a microwave or whatever, and they're expected to be eating takeaway food, which is not healthy. We know that, so we need to restore dignity to these families whenever they are homeless, to make sure that whichever temporary accommodation you put them, it can be an Airbnb, which allows them to actually, have cooking facilities. If it means you need to negotiate with these providers to make sure that they can give a reduced rate because you are booking for a block booking for a longer period of time, it's something that needs to be put in place. The other thing that can also be done is to make sure that there is early help, intervention, and prevention. And there's need for local authorities to focus more on early help so that we avoid crisis situations where things end up going down that path where families become homeless at the end of the day. And if we can also introduce dedicated family support workers who focus on preventing homelessness, who can be embedded within the housing department so that, work can still be done. And if a referral is made to children's services, a referral is made on the basis of identifying some parenting or identifying some deficit in their parenting, which may require a child and family assessment, rather than just to refer them on the basis of them being homeless as the issue. Whereas children's services is not a housing department. They have no stock of housing which they can, put these families in. So it's something that needs to be put in place. So with those few words, I hope somebody has learned something, and I hope it might invoke some bit of conversation. So you're free to comment, be polite with your comments, put your comment in the comment section below. If you've got anything else to contribute to the conversation or to the discussion, feel free to actually do that. Thank you so much for watching, and if you haven't, please subscribe. Please do subscribe, hit that notification bell so that when I post, you'll be the first person to know. Thank you so much.